share my screen, and let me find that, of course. There we go. All right, you guys. All right, so we are here at with the Empowered Mind in partnership, Brightways Learning and Transition Alaska. And if you don't know who Brightways Learning is, let me just let you know that we do a lot of things. As I mentioned, we've worked with a lot of school districts across the state of Alaska over the last 12, 15 years. And we do something called Flight Club, if you've ever heard of Flight Club, and really Webs that support school, resilient educators, resilient student stuff, all kinds of different things for student-centered learning and growing, as well as educator support. And today, our facilitators for this will be Amy McDonald and David Pavish. So I'm going to hand it over to them.
Well, hi, and welcome to the Empowered Minds today. Like Kirsch said, my name is Amy McDonald, and I am a school counselor in Southeast Alaska. I live on Prince of Wales Island, and I work for Southeast Island School District. And one of my favorite things about Southeast is that it's pretty small and you get to know people really easily here. So there's lots of connection that happens in Alaska in general, but Southeast too, really tight knit communities here. I've done some consulting and working with Brightways for, since 2012, so 9 years. And they are an amazing group of people who really look at what's best for educators and what's best for students at the same time. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope we're going to have a great time. And I'll turn it over to Pav.
Hi guys, I'm David Pavish. I go by David or Pav, preferably not Dave. I live in Big Lake, Alaska, which if you're not familiar, it's about 45 minutes from Anchorage in the Mat-Su Valley. I just moved here from Wasilla about 6 months ago, and what I love about it is where I live feels really remote. So it's like quiet, peaceful, away from everything, but I'm really close to conveniences. Prior to working with Brightways, I worked in rural Alaska, and so I really appreciate conveniences and low price groceries and gas. I've been working with Brightways. I started with consulting work also, just like Amy, but in 2014. So it's going on 7 years, which is kind of crazy to think. And I am just really excited to be with you guys. This training that we're going to do today, to me, is so applicable and so deep, yet so simple. And so it's really exciting that we get to share this with you. And we're going to start by doing a little activity to kind of set your brain up to kind of prepare for what we're going to share with you. So like the slide shows that you're looking at right now, we want you to make take a piece of paper and make this quadrant. So 4 quadrants. The top 2 are for you, and the bottom 2 are about your students. So top 2 about you, top 2 about students. And what we'd like you to do is I'm going to play a song, and that song is, let's see, how long is it? It is 3 minutes and 41 seconds. So I'm going to play this song, and during that time, we'd like you to fill this out. So example, for myself, things that bring me peace and patience. When I really need solitude, I love to be outside in the sun. Even in the winter, today it's blue sky and sunny. It just really resets me, even if it's just for a few minutes. Things that reduce my patience. One of my biggest things is when people's lack of planning creates emergencies on my part. And I have no patience for that. And so it kind of can set me off. And depending on how big it is, it sets me off more than it probably should. And then on the flip side with your students, what are you noticing about your kids that they feel at peace? It could be that you notice that they like to be on their phone on a break. It could be that they like to talk with their friends on a break. It could be that they need a snack. It could be all these different things. And then what are the things that you see in your students that unsettle them? It could be a pop quiz and you see in their faces like, right? It could be a number of things. So again, when the music plays, go ahead and fill this out. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to share one of those things from each section in the chat when we're finished. All right, here we go. All right, great. Wherever you are is awesome. You can continue to do this on your own if you would like later. This is something you could hold on to and use as a lens when you are working with your kids to kind of think about these things. And Amy will dive into why a little bit later. In the meantime, if you would please in the chat, just enter one thing. The first thing we're going to talk about is yourself. So what are some things that bring you peace and patience? If you could just enter that in the chat and we'll kind of read along together, that'd be great. Knitting, awesome. Time in the boat, gardening, camping, being with your dog, cleaning house. I have heard this and I have yet to figure out how that works. So this is what's so great about this though, right? Is that everyone is different, right? That does not bring me peace. that brings me stress. Like it has to get done. However, my sister, raised in the same house, thrives on organizing. It makes her feel so good to open that pantry and see everything organized. And I am more like, Kim, will you come organize my pantry?
I think the difference is, Pav, is I like it when it's clean. I'm not sure I like the process of getting to that point.
Exactly, exactly. Great, thank you guys. Also, we see exercise, drinking tea. I
Oh,
don't.
a stress
Oh,
organizer.
Hig. Okay, Corey. So that is the Dutch way of living and thinking, correct? My
Yeah, Danish, but Huga.
Danish. Okay,
Huga.
awesome. Which, by the way, if you don't know what that is, Google it. It's very interesting and very cool. Or you can just talk to Corey. She's got it. Great, thank you. Now, what are some things that you notice that bring peace to your students? So now we're thinking on a student level. Daily schedule, absolutely. Being able to choose what they want to work on. Yep. Being successful, a helper, positive recognition, listening to music, connection time, both structured and unstructured, absolutely. Unstructured time, recess, yep. Cheerful welcome in office, even when they're behind on work. Great, that's fantastic. Art, nature. Yeah, and you know, what's awesome about these things, you guys, is you know, sometimes we don't realize the impact we have on kids. I still remember in 3rd grade walking into class on the first day, and there's this whole shelf of games and toys. And our teacher said, whenever we're not able to go outside, you will be free to pick whatever you want to play with during our recess time from these shelves. I still remember that. And so, you know, being intentional about those things and actually creating those things instill in things that kids won't forget, right? Don't forget the impact that we have even on little things like listening to music or positive recognition. So cool. Thank you so much, you guys.
Nice. All right. So, Kirsch, do you want to go ahead and go to the next slide? Thanks. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain today. And I hope that you had an opportunity to watch the video that's on Transition Alaska that Dante Huffine did. He's another facilitator for Brightways, and he's an actor, and so he is quite fun and interesting to watch. So let's just, a lot of lists that we're going to talk about you may already know. We're just going over simple format so that we can all have a common language for the rest of the time together today. So we want to make sure we understand left and right side of the brain, and so nice. Dan Siegel in, I think the book is called The Whole Child, made it really clear: logical, literal, linguistics, linear. All those left brain things start with L, right? So it makes it easier to remember. Right brain is more the kind of random stuff: emotional, nonverbal communication and experiences, experiential experiences, and then the autobiographical, sorry. And that's the story that we create for ourselves about our own lives and our own situation. The important thing is that we need to make sure that information passes between that left and right brain across the corpus callosum there in the center, so that we're not only thinking in our left brains or only thinking in our right brains. And sometimes that happens depending on the stressors in our world or the different things that we're engaged in at the time. But the goal is to keep it so that we can think with both that left brain and that right brain, and to recognize when we might not be thinking with both lobes of our brain. So remember, left and right integration, right across that corpus callosum. And then also we want integration from top to bottom. And our brain, where it meets our spinal cord at the brain stem, that's the first part that's developed, right? It's developed in the womb. it is where that fight, flight, freeze reaction comes from. The next part, if you move from the bottom, from the brainstem, kind of up a little bit, we call it the downstairs brain or the limbic system. Some people call it that reptilian brain. It develops around, kind of around 9 months or so. It's where that emotional maturity starts, behavior control, those kinds of things. It's kind of that part of the brain that acts without us thinking even sometimes. And then as we move up to the upstairs brain, we call it, it's sometimes doesn't, 25 years, you guys. I have a 21-year-old son, and I just can't even imagine 4 more years of him not having logical thinking and planning and cause and effect. He's a great kid, but wow, can't wait till that upstairs brain is developed. So also integration in the brain has to happen from top to bottom. And if we are in a situation where we're experiencing trauma or we have some sort of event happening in our lives that is difficult, that thinking starts from the brainstem and the reactions that come from us, and it stops depending on where the how severe the trauma is or how severe the situation is. And we want to teach our students to understand that, right? To understand, okay, if I'm in my brainstem, then I'm just breathing, and that's like not even something I'm conscientious of. When I get to my limbic system, then I'm more like, oh my goodness, am I going to survive this? Am I going to is this going to be like the end of me? So sometimes if we're there and our reactions stop there, we never get to the upstairs brain where the logical thinking happens. Lots of our kids who experience trauma sit in that downstairs brain and that limbic system a lot. Thanks, Kirsch. We can go to the next one. So just another little piece of information for the upstairs brain, just easy to remember. And downstairs brain, fight, flight, or freeze, those reactions that happen without us even thinking about them. And then the upstairs brain are like thinking, body control. It's where we play. It's where we develop relationships. It's where we learn to be empathetic. So it's where the real logical thinking happens, is in the upstairs brain. So what Dante's video on the Transition Alaska website was a really, really fun activity to do with students about learning about their brain and about integration and about what happens in each of the different parts of the brain. And just for a recap, in case you didn't get to see Dante's video, I made my own model to share with you about what happens in the brain, and a great idea for you to see and use with your students. So we're thinking of the brain, my fist, as the brain. And when everything is all together, when the top of my brain is folded down, everything's touching. That means that information is passing easily from all the different parts of the brain. And what it does is it creates kind of this beautiful ecosystem, right? So I have trees that are growing healthily. I have a nice river down here. If I had done it, I could have put some fish in that river. There's some birds flying up here in the sky, right? So this is a kind of everything's working together to make sure that the trees are growing, that the birds are able to survive, and that the river has enough water to support the ecosystem. Sometimes when we call this our flipped lid, it's Dan Siegel came up with this model. You can Google it. He's got some great information on the web. So sometimes our brain flips, our lid flips like this. And this little piece, this limbic system here, gosh, I can't even bend my thumb so you can show you. I'll show you like this. So I drew a match on my thumb. And sometimes something as little as this match can create a big old fire within our ecosystem. And just this little tiny thing, right, might make this whole brain that's all working together, healthy ecosystem, might make the lid flip a little bit. And then we've got this roaring fire going on here. And when our lid is flipped, we feel dysregulated. It's not a bad thing. It happens to all of us. And what we want to teach both adults and youth is that when our lid is flipped, what are some things that we can do to re-regulate, to get our upstairs and downstairs brains thinking together again? So I want you to see a couple of things when my lid is flipped here and I have this fire raging in the center of my brain. Um, some of the trees have burned down from the flames and the fire. Not all of them. So I can be dysregulated and my lid can be flipped, and some things in my world will continue to be healthy and feel normal. Other things won't be as healthy and normal, like the trees that burnt down. I live in Southeast Alaska. It rains all the time. So there's rain that comes down into my fire. And sometimes when my lid is flipped, if I can remember some of those things that help put out my fire a little bit, it will help me regulate my brain a little bit. It's kind of that mindfulness stuff and understanding what it feels like when your lid is flipped. Okay, so regulated ecosystem, everything's working together, functioning. When our brain is like this, we have integration left and right, we have integration top to bottom. Everything kind of functions as it's supposed to. All those neural pathways are healthy and they're traveling around. Sometimes we have little match that gets thrown in our forest and we get some fire growing down here. Some things feel crazy, burnt down, not good at all. Some things still feel the same as they always have. And learning about how to kind of put out that fire a little bit helps us re-regulate our brain. It's a really great activity you can do with kids. Gloves are cheap, Sharpies, and I've done it with some second grade teachers. That's the youngest I've done it with. And they had a great time working with their students just to understand the difference between everything together and tight and not feeling so together, and information not traveling back and forth as easily. So we asked you to either, in an email that I think Jess sent out, we asked you to either print out or to go online to this hand model of the brain activity sheet that we've supplied for your students to do. And there's two ways to do it. You can do the printed version where you could actually write on the piece of paper, or it's also in a Google Google Slides format where you could actually do it digitally online. And the idea about this is to create an opportunity for you and for youth to learn the parts of the brain and label them. The green arrows at the bottom are places that you would label them. And then also create your own metaphor for what it feels like when your brain is regulated and everything is communicating and functioning right, and what it feels like when you flipped your lid. So let's take maybe like 5 or 7 minutes, and you guys can complete this activity sheet to have the experience of what it will be like when you use this with your students. And Pav's gonna play some music for us. Thanks, Pav. I forgot I was muted. Thanks for the music, Pav. That was awesome. So the next piece that we're going to talk about is a little bit kind of a different way of looking at regulation. And this is another example that we have used with teachers and students in classrooms. And it's called the window of tolerance. And you'll notice in this diagram that's on the screen right now, this center part, the comfort zone, is the section where we are when we're regulated, when our brain is functioning in a way where all the parts are talking to each other and everything is calm and collected. You have great ability to self-soothe when you're in your window of tolerance. The top part, the red part that says hyper aroused, is when that lid flips a little bit. Some people get hyper aroused, and that's the people that go into the fight or flight response, where I'm sure you've seen it in your students before, where they're just like mad and anger, and maybe that's when they get in fights at school or run away, those kinds of things. Other students, and sometimes this is a big one that we forget to watch for, and when their window of tolerance shrinks and maybe they're out of that window of tolerance, they might be hypo aroused, which is more like those kids that come to school maybe with their hoodies over their face, or maybe those kids who need to take a nap in the morning when they get to school. Maybe that's also, it's more like that freeze response of being out of their window of tolerance. The important thing to remember about that center piece, that center comfort zone window of tolerance, is it changes depending on what's going on in our lives. I was having a conversation with the teacher on Prince of Wales the other day, and she said, it just feels like everything upsets me. She said, I'm crying more often. My students are not responding to me as well. I feel like my lessons aren't as good. And so we sat down and we looked at the window of tolerance, and in the end, what the result of that conversation is as we're learning to teach virtually, some kids coming to school, some kids at home, a whole plethora of different kinds of schooling that we're doing, right? Hybrid situations for schooling, that our window of tolerance is shrinking because everything is new and different to us. And so in the end, what she and I kind of came up with is we just needed to remember, give ourselves some grace, and then think of different ways to stay in that window of tolerance. And when we stay in it, the more we stay in it, the more it might enlarge, right? And we'll have more of that space on this diagram that's within that comfort zone, in that window of tolerance, than in the hyper or hypo aroused state. Kirsch, can we go on to the next one? Thanks. And so this is another way of thinking about the window of tolerance. Corey, I'm out of my window of tolerance when everybody around me seems like an idiot. Exactly, right? And everybody's not an idiot. But when you think that, yeah, that's a perfect time to be like, ooh, I must be out of my window of tolerance. Something's not working right in my world right now. So we can look at the window of tolerance in this other example on this graphic right here. And think about it if you're on a boat. And when you're in your window of tolerance, that smooth sailing just kind of keeps you in that optimal zone. Your daily life is going on just fine. You're taking care of yourselves. Your job is working the way you want it to work. Feels just like smooth sailing. And it would be great if we were in that all the time, right? But sometimes we maybe go a little bit too far out of that window of tolerance and jump into that hyper arousal state where we're frantic. I know sometimes when I know I'm getting out of my window of tolerance when I feel like my eyes are big all the time. Like I can feel it in the muscle structure in my face. Another friend of mine says that when she walks down the hallway, like almost running, that's when she knows she's kind of gotten into that hyper arousal state where everything seems immediate and frantic and the seas are way rougher and there's no smooth sailing there. And the important thing to remember, and it's kind of the same thing when I took the glove off because my hand was hot. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. But you know those raindrops that were up here on my fingers? Knowing some of those ways the rain will calm the fire, some of those ways to bring ourselves back into that state of regulation is when we can pull ourselves from that hyper arousal state down back into the window of tolerance. And then other times, just recently, my significant other, he had some people in his family pass away pretty abruptly, 2 of them that were very close to us. And that's where I went completely into this hypoarousal stage. Like I just wanted to stay curled up on the couch. I wanted to not have to talk to people. I was tired all of the time. And so recognizing that that's not my normal nature. Like I usually have a lot of energy and I'm social and I like to talk to people. So recognizing that I was down in that hypoarousal state helped me to work on ways to get myself back into my window of tolerance. So the most important thing to take away from this whole idea of the window of tolerance is that it changes a lot and we can go in and out of that smooth sailing section. Same thing with our lids. When our lids and our brains, and it happens to all of us, you guys, not just our students, right? It happens to us as teachers too. When our lids flip in our brain, understanding that it's not a bad thing. When we're out of our window of tolerance, when our sailing isn't quite so smooth, it's not a bad thing. And we can't look at it as a bad thing when we see it happen to our students or to our colleagues. What we just have to recognize it, give it some grace, and figure out ways that work for us personally to help with that regulation again, to help us to get back into that window of tolerance so that we can feel positive and carry on with our daily life the way we want it to be. So the next thing we would like you to do is take another piece of paper. Right, Kirsch? Yep, there we go. And just label it like this. I don't need to show you on this. Label it like the picture on the screen. You're going to have 3 sections: hyperarousal, window of tolerance, that optimal zone, and then hypoarousal. And we want you to label what you see in your students when they're hyperaroused what you see in their behavior when they're hypoaroused, and what you see in the behavior of your students when they're in that smooth sailing section, so that we can have an idea of what all of those places look like. And another good point, thank you, Kirsch, good reminder. Sometimes there's and this is kind of a generic time frame, so please don't take this as set in stone. But it often takes on average, about 20 minutes when our lids are flipped, when we're out of that window of tolerance, to re-regulate again. And it's important to remember that for our students. So if you have a student who's blown out of your classroom and we go right out there after them, chasing them to talk to them about it, they're probably not ready to talk to us, right? So finding a mechanism so that they can have that 20 minutes or how much ever time it takes that student to regulate and have their lid come back to its normal state, where they can access their upper brain as well as their lower brain. Thanks for that reminder, Kirsch. So let's take a minute and Pavel will play some music again and fill in what it looks like when your students are when they're hyper-aroused, when they're hypo-aroused, and when they're in their window of tolerance. And we'll do some sharing out when we're finished. Probably do you have a 3-minute? All right. Now we're gonna do some waterfall chatting in the chat box. And here's the first question to answer in the chat box. What are some behaviors that you see when your students are hyper aroused? Defiance, yep. Swearing. Rushed, rushing through work without thought. Very talkative, can't sit still, yep. Refusing to do anything. Upset, emotional, lots of crying. I used to teach elementary school and kindergarten, and that was a lot of what I saw. Lots of crying when they were hyper aroused. Okay, here's the next one. This one's a little bit harder, and sometimes, withdrawn. Sometimes people don't recognize hypoarousal as a response to trauma or being outside of our window of tolerance. I've heard lots of people say, I can't believe you fell asleep in my class. And yeah, sometimes kids take advantage of that and take naps in class, and that's not cool. But sometimes that napping in class is an example of being out of their window of tolerance and being hypo-aroused. So what are some behaviors that you see when your students are hypo-aroused? Withdrawn is a good one. Silent, no facial expression or change. Avoiding contact, yep. Very quiet, don't want to talk. Disconnected, closed body language, depressed, sad, crying. Sometimes they say, when you ask them, hey, how's everything going? Yeah, everything's fine. Like that quiet. It won't work. Opposite of normal, talkative student is quiet. Yep, great. Great. All right, so just some things to keep in mind, some things to watch for. And I think it's really important for us as adults to teach our students about these things, about their flipping their lid. And it's okay, we got to just figure out regulation skills, right? Strategies to get there. I think it's really important to teach them about window of tolerance so that they can start to recognize, part of that emotional intelligence piece, right? Recognizing when they're in that window of tolerance, when they're hyper aroused, when they're hypo aroused, and to teach it to them without judgment, because it happens to the best of us. And they need to know that it's something that happens. It is fixable. It's not the end of the world, and that they can move on, and that our relationships can continue to be building and growing and solid, even though maybe they flipped you off as they walked out of the room yesterday, but that doesn't mean that your relationship, it might, you have to talk about it, right? But it doesn't mean that your relationship has blown up. Awesome. So I hope you can use some of that upstairs, downstairs brain and window of tolerance information with your students. And now we're going to turn it over to Pav for our next topic.
Cool. So we're just going to take a quick break before I jump into this. Just a quick 20-second. So when you, we want you to remove your eyes from looking at the screen for just a moment. So for 20 seconds, find somewhere that's outside or away from your screen, and then look at it for 20 seconds, whatever that item is.
About 20 feet away, if you can get 20 feet away.
Yep. All right, when you're done looking, come back to the screen, and we're just gonna take 2 big, deep breaths together. First one, ready? Exhale. One more. All right, awesome. Thank you, Amy, so much for that great explanation of window of tolerance and the brain. And when we look at this stuff, one thing I want to make really clear is something that is kind of one of our mantras at Brightways, which is if it's good for kids, it's good for us. If it's good for us, it's good for kids. So as you think about these things and as you process all of this stuff, I would say be aware that if you teach kids this and you teach kids the window of tolerance and about hyper and hypoarousal, they will begin to be able to identify when you are that way. And it's an opportunity for you to also show them that you're human and that these things happen to us too. It's not some weird, strange thing just because you're a teenager. And as you look at those things and as we're trying to identify those things, the next step would be, okay, so now what? Like, okay, so my kid's hyper aroused. What do I do? Well, every kid is different. And so we have this awesome model that is not our own. We did not create it, we use it. And it's called APAI. And if you watch the video, APAI is basically an acronym that stands for letters that we'll get to in a second, that was initially created by a nurse named Ida Jean Orlando. She wanted a way to consistently be able to determine what her patients needed as a nurse and how she could address those things. Well, then some researchers came in, Mary B. Walsh and Helen Petro-Ura, and were like, yes, absolutely, great idea. So now this is actually a practice. They've added a letter since then, and now says ADPI because the D is for diagnose for the medical usage. However, how cool that something so important like the physical health of a patient can also be applied to, if you watched my video, determining how much wood you need to heat your house next year. I mean, the grand spectrum of how this can be applied is really limitless. And you know, we've mentioned Corey a little bit. We work with Corey, and she loves data. I mean, eats it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with some appetizers and desserts when she wants answers about something. And this is a way that you could do that. Now, granted, you can get to the point where you're doing this over and over and over again. You actually fear decision making. We don't want that for you. We want this to simplify things for you and your students. So the first letter in APAI is assess. So basically, you're going to assess the current situation. So if we're looking at a behavior of a kid, okay, well, what is the kid doing? What's the current situation? Maybe asking a colleague like, hey, this happened with this kid today, and not really sure exactly. Can you help me assess the situation? Then you go to the next step. After you know what the situation is, then you're going to actually make a plan. And the plan is just creating the strategy. So this isn't the doing yet, right? This is the planning. And you think, okay, well, so Johnny was hyper aroused yesterday. He did it this way. This is how I saw it. That was my assessment. Here are some strategies to bring him from here to here in my classroom based on what he needs, right? And then what I like to tell kids is, and then you do it. So the next one is implement. And so this is the stage when I'm working with students. I quote my dad a lot. I quote my dad a lot anyway, because he's 78 years old and has lived quite the life. But he used to always say, knowledge is fantastic, but if you do nothing with it, it's just knowledge. Wisdom is applying that knowledge. And so I often will have conversations with kids where they know the problem, they've made a plan, but they never do it. They never actually get to it. So it's that taking the knowledge they have and then how will they implement it? And during this time, while you're implementing, you monitor like, oh, well, so I've noticed that I tried this, this, and this, 3 things to support Johnny, but only one of them worked. Okay, that's what you're gonna do in this section. You're gonna monitor and do it. Then the next one, oh, this is continued. So again, you can go back, Kirsch, go ahead and go back. So during this time too, sorry, the next one. Yes. During this time, it's not static. So it's not one of those things where you say, well, I'm going to give Johnny an opportunity to have his own timeout doing the things that will help him get back to regulating. It didn't work though. And so it doesn't mean you have to like keep doing it over and over again because that was your plan, right? You adjust, you monitor, revise. And if you need to start over again and say, I've discovered some new things, go back a step, right? Then with the evaluate section, when you're done, so we realized that the last slide said implement, but really it's this weird kind of blurry stage. So just so you know, it was right information, wrong slide. But can you go back to that, Kirsch? It's okay. So this should have said evaluate, but during the implementation process, it is okay to also do these things. Once you've tried it and like put in the full effort, then you can also do a more full evaluation. It could be that you bring in that person that you assessed with also and say, hey, will you help me see if this really worked? Here's some things that worked, here's what didn't. And then you may go all the way back to assess. And this API is over and over again. So in nursing, if you guys have ever had surgery or if you've ever been to the hospital, you'll notice that the nurse doesn't come in the morning and then never sees you again until bedtime. They are monitoring. So they're assessing every time and they're diagnosing, they're implementing what they're supposed to do. And then maybe in the afternoon, that might have to change, right? So it's the same thing with our kids. Things sometimes have to change. All right. So if you had the opportunity to watch the video, I won't make you tell me in chat, just in case some of you don't want to admit it. But if you didn't get a chance to watch the video, the basic idea was I went outside, I have a cabin, it heats with oil and wood, and I'm coming to the end of my first winter. So I am assessing what I need for next year. And so I looked at what I used this year. I looked at the temperatures this year. Thankfully, for me, it's been a mild winter where I live, in spite of the fact of it being 8 below last night. January and February are usually like 20 below or 15 below, and we hardly ever had that. So I didn't use as much. So I'm doing all this stuff. So during that video, I went through the whole process of how you could do this, how you could implement this thing. So we have a few minutes. If you have this document, this is also from the Transition Alaska thing. You can either take the PDF and print it off, or it's interactive. And you can discover which problem you want to do. So you could actually do what we just did today. Look at the problem or challenge as being identifying when one of my students is not regulated. So that would be one of the first things. And you would describe what that looks like, make a plan, implement it, and evaluate. You see, it's this cyclical thing. And it really never stops, guys. It's kind of like saying, I know everything. Well, we realize you don't, right? I don't know everything. I'm in a constant place of learning. We don't know what we don't know. This is a way to figure out what we know and learn more. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and I'm going to play a song. And I would like you to take this document and implement these things for a few minutes, and then we'll share some of your discoveries in chat briefly when we're done. And there's a link in chat, by the way. If you don't have it, you can get that link in the chat box. Thank you, Kirsch. All right, wherever you are is great. Again, just like the previous activities, if you want to continue this later, you're welcome to do that. Would you please in the chat box just put an aha that you had during this process, whatever it was, some new aha moment you had. I think about the how of describing problems here because complex questions may need their own API for each subcomponent. Like I said, Corey loves data. Thank you for proving me right. I love it. So this is true. So just so you know, this is not a static thing, right? You may say that that you felt like this thing put your student into hypoarousal, and now you're going to assess how you need to do that differently to avoid it, right? So I mean, there's elements within this that can be multifaceted, multi-layered, for whatever you want to do, however long or how much you want to invest in this process. With some students, it may take more time than others or more assessments than others. I am distracted by music, but many need music to think. Thank you for that. Yes, we get that from some people, that yeah, music is a deterrent. One of the reasons why we use it a lot, especially virtually, is dead air can tend to feel longer. And so when people finish early, they're just sitting and they disengage. And so it's one of the kind of tricks we use. And we recognize that some people, like Kirsch, are not big fans of trying to think with music. So thank you for that. Appreciate the input. It would be easier with students in school to think better about this. Okay, excellent. Very important to remember, yep. I also work best with music. I was raised in a musical home, so it's weird to not have it ever. And I always struggled with teachers that wouldn't let us listen to anything because the silence was distracting. It's so interesting. Everyone's different, right? Any other ahas that you had during this time? All right, cool. I hope that was productive and helpful, and hopefully this is something that you can do with your students as well to guide them along in making decisions and knowing how to make the decisions for themselves. That's why we're calling this the empowered brain, right? We want kids to be empowered to know when they're not regulated, to know how to make a decision, so that you are kind of the consultant instead of the pusher, right? Awesome. Great. Cool. So we're going to do one little fun thing. We're going to do a breakout group. So hopefully those of you that don't have your cameras on are really there. Because if you're not, your name will be in a breakout group, but you won't be. So just a heads up for that. We're going to break you up into groups. And if you could just share with each other one way you can learn, or one way you can use what you learned today from how the brain works and a pie. So that's what you're going to discuss. And then choose one person in your group that will share out using your microphone. You'll share out those things that you learned as a group. So Kirsch is going to put you in those breakout groups. You have about 5 minutes. And there are countdowns. So there's a countdown to the 5 minutes and to when you're going to be put back into the main room. So just be aware of that, and we will see you in 5 minutes.
To the whole group, some of the things that you can use what you learned today.
Are you good, Sabrina? It was cutting out when I said that.
I can share.
Okay, cool.
So Corey and I were in a room and we just kind of just chit-chatted about just the activities. So one thing that I was reflecting on was more of me, reflecting on me and my window of tolerance. You know, if I was that little boat, my boat would be going like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to learn how to self-regulate better, to do a little wave and not be, you know, going up and down. We just talked and shared a little bit about what we've learned, how we're going to use it. Corey talked about changes in her position next year and ways that she could use it. And I just was doing a lot of reflecting because this is my 23rd year, but my first year without a classroom. I'm in central offices, and so I was like, okay, I now can make a connection to that kid I had last year that would be hyper aroused and for 20 minutes was out of control, but then would come back in the classroom and be, I'm back. And the whole class is like traumatized. Like,
Yeah.
so we did a little reflecting.
Nice. Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate that.
Yes,
All right.
thanks, Sabrina.
Somebody from breakout room 2. Who is your spokesperson?
I don't think we really officially had a spokesperson, but we talked a little bit about the pie for decision making. I talked about I would like to use flip this one. I do teach gifted and talented, so K through 5. So I do see a lot of different emotions. So that might be a really cool activity to use with those guys. Some of us discussed how it's hard to think about this when some of us are in person, some of us are still remote. So not being with our students for a long amount of time has affected kind of what we can think about. But it was just a conversation around some of the aha. So that's some of the things I remember sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brandy. Wonderful. So what about breakout room 3?
I'm just gonna go for a triple by Kodiak over here. So if that's okay with group 3, we didn't choose either.
Okay.
But I think we all really, none of us are traditional classroom teachers right now. And so we had the lens of who we work with and how we might use it with those people or with ourselves. And then we also all agreed that I think many of us had seen this before, but the addition of the glove and being able to draw on it really upped it. And it's something that can universally be used, whether they're with students that are K-12 or students that are people that we're mentoring or coaching, or maybe people that we're reaching out to as support who are in the education field.
Nice. Nice. Thank you so much, Joanne. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you guys for your input on that. It's always good for us to hear too what people gain from different activities that we're able to share. So we really appreciate your input. So the last piece, we're about 13 minutes till we want to respect your time and not keep you longer than we said we would. So one of the things Jess and Jim are working really, really hard to make this Transition Alaska portal useful to staff and students. And so we just wanted to kind of get some input from people and maybe brainstorm some ideas of how you can use some ideas that you use to support your students accessing the resources that are in the Transition Alaska portal. So these resources that we've used today are all in there. Jim and Jess have put a lot of other resources in there. It's broken up into elementary, middle, and high school, so you can choose more appropriate to your age level of students that you work with. So we just were trying to think of, we wanted you guys to help us think of ways of how to support getting kids in there and using those resources in Transition Alaska. How are you using them? How have you seen other people? What ideas do you have so that more people, more students will access those resources? And we just would like to do a waterfall chat. So if you can put some of your ideas in the chat so everybody can see them and we can share them with each other to try and increase the use of the Transition Alaska portal. A website scavenger hunt, nice. Kids love those. They just really get out and like doing that. Oh, a transition camp for the end of March, and then you'll use it during your transition camp, nice. One of the thoughts I had was, I don't even know if the regular ed teachers in my district know about the portal, and just trying to get them in there, maybe at an in-service, just take 20 minutes and have them play around in there and find what's there, what's available, how to set up an an account. Yeah, just what Sabrina just said it, teaching the students and teachers how to access and what is available. Perfect. Sabrina, you were reading my mind. Any other great ideas that we could share with people? All right, that's good. Thank you for that. I love the scavenger hunt, and then actually using it at the transition camp. I'll be really interested to hear how that goes. So hopefully we'll get some feedback on that. And then for our last little bit, I am going to turn it back over to Kirsch.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here today and for participating. It's so much more interesting, and we're always learning from you, who we serve, of course, every time we have a workshop, professional development like this. And we do have more opportunities also. In fact, we just today confirmed that, wait for it, we're going to be in Alyeska Resort end of July for our big, very popular Resilient Educators 2-day workshop. So you're on our mailing list. We'll make sure to stay in touch with you to let you know when. But it's one of the best times, especially we're really looking forward to seeing people in person again and really getting the time for deeper conversations. The content is really great. So you got one taste, a little bit of a taste of how Brightways Learning does professional development. We're engaging. We like to honor the knowledge and expertise in the room, and just make great connections and friendships with people we know and new folks that we grow to serve. So I invite you to just, stay in touch with us. If we can do anything for you in services, there's going to be money coming up for the stimulus money, right? The COVID stuff for professional development. And so certainly as a nonprofit, we try to make things affordable, and we can do virtual, in person as possible, obviously. Please get in touch with us. We'd love to help and serve you, and we do customized stuff. So please let us know. connect@brightwayslearning.org is a way to get in touch with us, or we will have someone follow up with you from here as well. So just thank you very much for being here, and Anne, for everything you do to help support your students, and especially being here to support yourself. So I hope you got some great stuff today. And also, if you were at the last workshop, that was good for you as well. If you could help us help you and help your students, I'm just gonna put an evaluation link in the chat. Hopefully it won't take too long, but your feedback is really crucial to help us do better and be here for you. So we'd love it at any time. Just take that link and click into it. And if you could do that, that would be wonderful. So thank you so much, Amy and Pav and Jess, for being here today and providing this great content for our groups. So wonderful. And have a great rest of your week, you guys. Anything else, Amy, Pav?
Nope. Thank you,
Nope,
guys.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. It means a lot.
So much more fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care, guys.
All right. Take care.